sir.
Hey, Nard, you got some time?
Will operate under phase 2 of reopening.
Uh-oh.
What'd you say?
Yes, you have some time. Can we talk?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Cool. Look, I want to talk to you specifically about I want to say media is too broad a term, but media in this time of COVID. There's a couple of things. First, I got to check on my peoples, as they say. I'm up here in Missouri. You down there? Where you at? North Carolina.
Right.
You done returned to home. So we doing home, huh?
Well, close to my parents' home.
Oh, okay. Well, let me put it this way. Your parents are so in other words, your people are from North Carolina, no?
They're from South Carolina. That's why I said near.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Well, there you go. That's close enough. It's like, I guess that's the distance between the Patterson projects and the Lincoln projects. So anyway, listen, man. What I'm trying to do is just record things for my YouTube channel. As you may or may not know, I have a YouTube channel. It's not monetized. I don't get a lot of traffic. Don't want a lot of traffic. It's Creative Commons, and it's really for archival purposes only. That's why I actually got the channel. When it first started a long time ago, 2011. So this is not. We're not trying to get clicks or nothing like that. We're just trying to trying to have conversations, And so let me start this way. One of the things that I most admire about the work that we did in Emanations specifically is that we'd have a story or we have something that's happening and we deal with it, and then all of a sudden the rest of the world would pick it up. But as soon as they picked it up, we just I guess we got to go to something else, and we just go to something else. And am I remembering this correctly or what?
Yeah, because usually we would, based on our feeling and based on being out in the street, we would come back and talk about what we found out in the street. And sooner or later, it would work its way up into the regular news.
Yeah. Well, my point is, I guess my question is, basically, you were the captain of the ship, in other words. So in other words, you're the one responsible for that. So how did you get that in your head? How did that happen? Why did you get that way of working? Let me put it that way.
Well, what happened? I used to go to a lot of different demonstrations, and I would rush home in the evening to find out what to see it on the news. And the news told a totally different story than the one that I experienced while I was out there in the street. And I always felt that, one of the things that didn't happen was that the people that were reporting the news didn't really know what was going on, or they were listening to the police report of it. And so I wanted to get into the newsroom to tell the real story. But I found out when I got into the newsroom, then into commercial media, that they were, it was like they weren't interested in finding out what the real story was. They was interested in finding out what the police had to say about what went on. And the police always told the story differently than what happened. Like most of the time that there was a riot or disturbance, it was because the police started it, and when the people responded, that's when the news came in and told the story, just of the community's response, but not of the police initiation of the action that caused the response. So what I began to do was tell what was happening from the very beginning, and then eventually the real story came out. So we always stayed ahead of it by just starting out telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I guess since this is, I guess we're talking to history right now. I'm not talking about talking to the world. I used to do this thing on Pan-African Space Station in Africa, and one of the initiatives we had we'd have this little platform or this little people a band could come and play or whatever have you, from the community. And I would tell the people, look, even if there's 25 people in the audience, you have to understand this is going to live forever. So you're going to be reaching, 25 million thousand people, So for me, I guess we have to sort of clarify this. When you said go back and tell these stories, where were you telling these stories at? You had to have a media outlet. How did you start to do this? Just give us a little rundown here.
Well, let me see. I was my first experience with media was going into WWRL, which was a commercial radio station, and there was a guy there in the newsroom named Dick London.
There in New York, yeah.
And I at first when I went there, I would just stand around to watch what he was doing because I wanted to see how they prepared the news. And what he was doing at that time was just primarily ripping and reading. He would go to the Associated Press, go to Reuters, go to United Press International, just rip it off, make sure that they had the dates right, and just read whatever was put there.
Well, I guess we better clarify a little bit when we say rip and read, because we're insiders. But basically, these machines that are almost like teletype machines. I'm not saying the teletype, but almost like typewriting machines. And so we could, and then you sort of rip it off there, just rip, and then you would read what they've said. In other words, what happened? Something would happen. Somebody would report it to an editor or something like that. That editor would then refine it and then send it out to basically the world, and then the world would read what the version was. Right,
and these machines were located in all of the major news outlets. They all had a machine. There were three basic machines. Well, 4 basic machines. The very rich stations had 4 basic machines. They had the Agence Presse.
Yeah, out of France.
But it was United Press International, Reuters, and Associated Press. Right. And they would take the stories when they would type them up. They would rip it off the machine, and then they would just read it. They would check it just for minor details, and then they would rip it off the machine. Then they would read it to the public as if that was the news. But that really wasn't the news, and those stories were written by many of the people that participated in these events. It was written by folks who witnessed the events, who interpreted the events, and then presented it to the public.
Now we're really talking about let's put a time frame or a close time, late 60s, early 70s. Just put it that time frame. Not that you was doing, but about that. But the reason, I don't want to say the trick in that, but the situation of that was that since it was being read by somebody, since you listened to your favorite radio station, somebody with a familiar voice, then you would more likely that you would believe what was being read to you.
Right. Because these folks would come to you every afternoon or every evening, and after a while you begin to know them on a first-name basis and begin to talk about them on a first-name basis because these are folks who you rely on for the news and rely on for the news to be accurate, and it wasn't.
So then what happened? So you're there in New York. Checking out what Mr. London is saying, and then what happened?
Well, then I remember he let me write a story from a demonstration that I was at, and he looked at it, and he said, "That's nice," and then he threw it in the garbage and read from the Associated Press. And the story that I read, I felt was more accurate than the one that came across the line. But he wasn't interested in that. And also, one of the things that he was moving that he was following, and I didn't realize this until later, that the people who ran the station were expecting him to read Reuters and read Associated Press and read United Press International as it came across the line. And he understood that, and he did not deviate from that.
Well, they were given the paycheck.
That's right.
Well, let me ask you, now what gave you the gumption to think, to think that he was going to read something that you wrote? I mean, would you have some sort of background that you say, "Hey, I'm a good writer. I'm a good newspaper." What was? How did you get to that situation?
Well, I kept telling him that that's not what happened. That's not what happened. And so he said, "Well, you write it." And I did. And my naivete, I thought that it would be really considered, but it wasn't even really considered.
Okay, so let's move on. So then what happened next? You got frustrated there, and WWRL.
Well, then I was one of those people who I would go through the dial listening to various news reports and various news programs, and one day I ran across a radio station that there was some cursing on the station, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, back in the 60s, late 70s, early 70s, that was just unheard of. You would not hear any cursing on the air. That was just unbelievable. So I used to tell my friends that, hey, there's this radio station that they curse on. And I kept tuning in to hear them curse again.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt you. But when you say you told your friends, what do you mean by that? Where were your friends at? Where were you hanging out that you had some friends that were impressed that they had a radio station that cursed?
But, surprisingly, none of my friends were impressed.
They were.
They were shocked that there was a radio, that I said that there was a radio station that cursed, but they weren't really impressed. But I kept listening. I kept listening, and I realized that the surprising part was not that they were cursing, but they had a freedom there that was unlike any other radio station. And I'm talking about WBAI in New York. And they had stories, or people that came in from the street to tell stories that went along with what I was witnessing in the street. They were also did a lot of work, a lot of civil rights work. They followed a lot of the civil rights workers and some of the things that they were doing. So I became interested in the station. I wanted to go down there because they were more in line with what I was thinking that news ought to be. It ought to be a real reflection of what was actually happening. So I went down there. There was a guy named Samori Marksman who was the program director. I told him what I wanted to do. When
you said you went down there, where was it? What time period was it? Where was this at?
This was around 1980. Yeah, 1979, 1980.
Okay.
So I went down to the station in 1980, November 22nd, 1980.
Oh, that's an auspicious date. Okay.
Yeah, and I met this guy named Robert Knight, who was in the newsroom, and I gave him a copy of. He asked me if I could write a little story, so I went to the Associated Press, the wire of the Associated Press, saw the story, and rewrote it. It was about the Russians had just sent up a Soyuz satellite, and I wrote that, when this satellite went up in the air, it launched the expectation or something like that. And he liked it. So he said, okay. So I started doing news reports.
Okay, so again, what expertise did you have to rewrite a Reuters story? Were you trained in journalism and writing? How did that happen?
No. I guess it just from listening to various stories over the years. But I had no training at all.
Okay, so what happened next? So now you got some chops under you. Somebody encouraged you somebody who headed a newsroom. So you said, okay, what happened?
Yeah. Well, while I was in the newsroom, the Atlanta murders began to happen.
Mm.
So I became the expert on the Atlanta murders. I covered all of the stories. That was the story that I did every night. I met over the telephone a lot of the people that were directly involved. I had a friend that moved from New York to Atlanta. He was an activist, and he was also directly involved. So I became the conduit for information about that. And I followed that story from the beginning to the arrest of the guy who they claim was involved in committing the murders.
Mm. Mm. Okay, I'm not gonna ask you about who did what. There's some new stuff coming out and all this other stuff. In fact, one of my fraternity brothers did a whole thing on that recently. So let's move on from there. So now you got a little people impressed with your reportage, or what was going on?
Yeah, they were impressed with that, and I wanted to do more. Mm. So I spent just about every day at WBAI, being very quiet, learning about international affairs, reading up on materials that came in, and trying to see how the radio station worked, because I wanted to know how the whole thing worked from beginning to end, to top to bottom. Mm.
So in other words, but when I met you were running your own board quite competently, as a matter of fact.
Correct.
Did you have expertise in engineering yourself already, or that came about, as you said, from watching and constantly being at the station? How did that happen?
I knew nothing about engineering. I thought that the board was one of the most complicated things in the world. When I used to sit there and watch people run it, it's just like it was magic. They would hit a button and this would happen, and hit another button and that would happen. And I wanted to learn how to do that. So I learned how to run a board. And then one of the things that really fascinated me about doing radio at BAI was that you could do two things at once. For instance, you could play music in the background while you were speaking in the foreground, and that there was music that spoke to exactly what you were dealing with at a particular point in time. So I began to blend those things together, and that's what really began to distinguish me, that I was able to do the research and come up with different music for different events, for different moments in history.
Now, I know you may or may not remember this, but I came to BAI because I was listening. I grew up in New York, but I never knew about BAI really. But then I went. Basically, I was out of the state for a long time. I came back in like 1980, and I got frustrated with theater because of stuff that was happening then. So that's when I started listening to BAI. When I was missing my missing years, I was actually I had my own radio. I had my own radio program. In fact, right now I am with the first person that I did radio with. I was the poet in residence for a thing called Saturday Soul with JB. I'm at his house right now. You know, been at Princeton. He was at Princeton. He's a student at Princeton University. That's where the show was. But what happened was, and when I finally got to my other undergraduate school, Livingston College, I had my own radio program called Variations in Blackness. And the stuff that I was doing was exactly that, blending music and a bunch of other stuff. But when I got to New York and I was listening to all over the dial, your program, I said, oh, this is the guy that does the thing closest to what I do. So I came in as a volunteer because of what you were doing. In other words, I would have never came to the station if you weren't there doing what you was doing, because it was closest to my sensibility. So I just wanted to tell you that. I want to tell you one more tiny story about engineering. This is funny. As you know, I engineer a lot, whatever, did what you did, was basically watch the station. But I used to engineer for Alambre Breath, as you know, when he did Afro Kaleidoscope. And so one night, for some reason, I couldn't stay. This is after Alambre had been there for years. And I said, Alambre, you got to run your own board. He was trying to give me some lip. I said, Alambre, let me say it. He said, all you do is play music and take some phone calls, maybe. And I said, I sat him there. And I'm talking about, this is like 10 minutes before the program started. I said, you do this, do that, see ya. And I left. And he ran his own board for that night. Big deal, you know what I mean? So I'm not saying it's easy, but if you set your mind to it.
Few glitches here and there, but he ran it.
Yeah, but anyway, let's go on. I was going to give you a little caveat.
But you know what happened is that one of the things that we're denied as a people, and it's still happening today with computers and such, is that we don't have access to the technology. But once we get access to it, we realize that it's really easy to use. It's just a question of getting in there and being able to have access to the technology, to play with it, to work with it, and that's what kind of holds us back and separates us, that we don't have access to the technology.
Yeah, and the space the space, like Miles Davis said, there are no mistakes. There's only way you take things. So the space to take things places, Right. And to try, because we have a certain culture. Everybody has a certain culture, and our culture is it's like a jazz culture. Jazz is it allows you to do. In the jazz group, you have different musicians. You have the jazz, the saxophone player, the piano player, the bass player, and everybody gets a shot to interpret the music that they hear within the context of the group, and it all mingles and comes together. You know what I mean? Of course.
I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
hey, there are no wrongs. There's only way you take it. Come on.
Right.
We just went over it.
Right.
Listen, Bernard, I want to keep on going and just have you just interpret a little journey for you. Not for your journey, but let me jump to the state of media now, or the state of what's going on now. I want to continue to have conversations, maybe every other week or something like that, with you in this kind of situation, if you can. But just tell me, let's go to now. What's happening now? When you see, you're a veteran. If you're saying from 1980, at least from 1980 or before until right now, we're 2020. I don't know how many years that is. I'm not good at math, but it's a lot of years. So the point is, what have you seen not what have you seen change, but right now, just take us now. And not what's wrong, but what's the shape of it? Just give me a little bit on this.
Well, I think media right now is going through a transition. There are a lot of folks who went to school who have taken media classes, and this crop of folks that took media classes, there were folks before that took media classes in media and in communication. But this group that's coming in now is a lot different than the group that came in before. The group that came in before, they were interested in blending in with what was already there. Mm-hmm. This new group that's coming in is coming in with a sense that that they need to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. They are the sons and daughters of the civil rights movement, that they see life a little differently because of the experiences that they've had, and they're beginning to proliferate around the country and begin to challenge a lot of the the way media was done in the past. They have, and one other thing that's changed is that there are a lot of women involved. A lot of women who have become very important reporters of what's going on. And their view, or how they view things, is a lot differently than the white men of old. And as a result, we're in the middle of a change. It hasn't turned, it hasn't ended yet. But the media is changing a bit.
Mm. Well, I'm not challenging you. I just want to say something here. Everybody keeps on saying the civil rights movement. Now, you, as we say, you from the North. You know what I mean? I know you wasn't down there with no dogs getting bit or getting bopped over the head or no bridges or nothing like that. And one of the most, I went off on this John Lewis whole situation because I'm saying, I was thinking, especially when Bubba went up and did his little thing against Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, is that what people don't understand, all these people that made their little bones, they wouldn't have did it without the upheavals of the North. And the whole situation to me is frustrating because a lot of these so-called a lot of these civil rights people, they got in a position and they wouldn't get the people that are actually in jail right now out of jail. They're to me, their only job is to get some of these folks that were part of the upheavals, part of the what they call the Black Power movement, whatever, out of the jails that they know what they were unwarranted in. I mean, right now, H. Rap Brown is in jail in Arizona or something like that. We won't even talk about Mumia because we interviewed Mumia before he was in jail, where he was dealing with the MOVE thing. Talk a little bit about that because this is frustrating to me.
Well, when I say civil rights movement, I meant all of it. Mm. That I saw all of that as a civil rights movement. Mm. As that movement by Mumia, by the Panthers, by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the
SNCC, yeah,
the Baptist ministers, this was all a part of the civil rights movement, and it needed all of those parts in order to be successful. Certainly, John Lewis wouldn't have been as successful as he was, but if it was not for these other parts. We would isolate him and look at what happened to him and what he had done, but it was all a part of a movement.
Well,
and
I'm sorry.
And I think that one of the things that announcers have to do is to show that it's all that it was all one gigantic movement for the human rights.
Yeah, but the how I say the forces that be while they deal with a John Lewis. I mean, Bobby Rush went through the same thing. I mean, but they're not exalting Bobby Rush. You understand what I'm saying? Even though he's sort of going through the whole same transition too. I don't know what that's about. But you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but that's the nature of news. Mm. That they can there's only room for certain stories. Certain stories become prominent, but there are many other stories that need to be told, and so that the whole picture can be painted. Right now, they're just focusing on a little corner of the picture, but there's a much larger picture to be told.
Well, it's interesting that you should talk about women like that because I'm sitting here in Missouri, St. Louis, right across from East St. Louis. But in St. Louis, there was a